This is a story about how Georgia Governor Brian Kemp sold out every public school student, teacher, and parent to protect President Trump. Welcome to The Price of Silence. Governor Brian Kemp adjusted his tie for the third time as he stared out the window of his office at the Georgia state capitol. The protesters had been gathering since dawn, their chants echoing through the marble halls. Fund our schools, fund our future. Teachers held signs with pictures of overcrowded classrooms and outdated textbooks. Parents clutched their children's hands, their faces etched with worry about another year of inadequate resources. The irony wasn't lost on him. Just 18 months ago, Kemp had stood at this same window, watching a much smaller crowd celebrate his re-election victory. He'd promised then to make Georgia's education system a national model. Now, he couldn't even maintain the status quo. Kemp's chief of staff, Sarah Martinez, knocked and entered without waiting for a response. "Governor, the Education Committee is here for the emergency meeting." He didn't turn around. "Tell them what we've told everyone else. The federal cuts are beyond our control." "Sir, with respect, they're not buying it anymore. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran the numbers this morning. Even with the federal cuts, we could cover the shortfall by reallocating from other areas or asking for a modest tax increase. Other states are doing it." Kemp finally turned, his jaw set. "Other states don't have to worry about their political future the way we do here." Martinez frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean that speaking out against the Education Stabilization Act would have been political suicide." The president made it clear. Governors who opposed his signature legislation would find themselves frozen out of party leadership. Do you know what that means for someone with national ambitions? Martinez had worked for Kemp for 6 years, since his first gubernatorial campaign. She'd seen him compromise before, but never like this. "But Governor, the ESA is gutting education funding across the country. 23 states have already announced they're raising taxes or cutting other programs to maintain school budgets. We're one of only 6 states that are thinking strategically." Kemp interrupted. "Look, Sarah, I didn't get to this office by being naive. The party is watching. Trump's watching. When he announces his education secretary pick next month, do you think he's going to choose someone who publicly opposed his biggest domestic policy win?" Martinez stared at him. "Are you seriously considering a cabinet position while Georgia's schools are falling apart?" Kemp moved to his desk, picking up a folder marked "Confidential." Inside were printouts of emails from the White House Chief of Staff, RNC leadership, and major donors. The message was consistent. Loyalty to the president's agenda would be rewarded. Dissent would be punished. The president's people have been very clear about their appreciation for governors who showed loyalty during the ESA debate. Meanwhile, governors like Stein in North Carolina and DeWine in Ohio, who spoke out against the cuts, they're persona non grata now. Governor Stein raised taxes to maintain school funding. His approval rating is at 68%. His approval rating won't matter when he's trying to get federal disaster relief next hurricane season. Kemp shot back. "Politics is about the long game. Sarah, sometimes you have to make tough choices." But even as he said it, Kemp knew his words rang hollow. The truth was simpler and more damning. He'd been too afraid to speak up when it mattered. 3 months ago, when the ESA was being debated in Congress, he'd received a direct call from the president. "Brian," Trump had said, his voice carrying that familiar mix of charm and menace, "I'm counting on my governors to support this. Education reform is the centerpiece of my domestic agenda. I need team players, not grandstanders." Kemp had mumbled his agreement, even as his own education advisors were showing him projections of what the cuts would mean for Georgia. When the Georgia Teachers Association had begged him to join other governors in opposing the bill, he'd told them his hands were tied. When the state legislature had passed a resolution urging him to speak out, he'd ignored it. Now, watching the protesters outside, Kemp felt the weight of his cowardice. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Kemp's press secretary, Jane Snell, entered, looking frazzled. "Governor, Channel 2 is running a story about the Decatur School District. They're having to cut art and music programs entirely. The reporter is asking for your response. Kemp sank into his chair. Tell them we're exploring all options within our current budget constraints. Sir, that's what we said last month, and the month before that. The teachers' union is calling for a statewide strike. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. Snell exchanged a glance with Martinez. They'd both been with Kemp since his first term, and they'd never seen him so disconnected from the consequences of his decisions. Governor, there's something else. My sources tell me that Senator Williams is planning to introduce a state bill next week that would raise corporate taxes to fund education. It's got bipartisan support. Kemp's face darkened. Williams is a Democrat. Of course he'd support raising taxes. Sir, it's not just Democrats. 3 Republican senators have already indicated they'll vote for it. They're saying you've left them no choice. The room fell silent, except for the distant chanting outside. Kemp walked back to the window, watching a young teacher holding a sign that read, "Our kids can't wait 2 years." Her name was Amanda Chen, though Kemp didn't know it. She taught 4th grade at Morningside Elementary in Atlanta, where class sizes had ballooned to 36 students. Amanda had been teaching for 8 years, and she'd watched the gradual erosion of resources with growing frustration. This morning, she'd left her own 2 children with a babysitter to join the protest, something she'd never done before. Kemp's phone buzzed. A text from his political advisor Marcus Webb. CNN wants you on tonight to discuss education funding. Great opportunity to show national leadership. ... Kemp stared at the message. National leadership. The phrase that had driven every major decision of his political career. He'd first heard it from his mentor, former Governor Tom Bradley, who'd told him that being governor of Georgia was just a stepping stone for the right kind of politician. Governor, Martinez said quietly, what happens if this bill passes? You'll have to decide whether to sign it or veto it. Kemp's reflection stared back at him from the window. If I sign it, I'm contradicting the president's entire education agenda. If I veto it, he trailed off. If you veto it, you'll be denying Georgia's children the resources they need while other states are stepping up. Martinez finished. Kemp turned back to his staff. Schedule a call with the president's chief of staff. I need to understand exactly what my options are here. Morrison looked incredulous. Your options, Governor. Children are sitting in classrooms with 35 students and textbooks from 2015. Teachers are buying supplies with their own money. What options do you need to understand? I need to understand what this means for my political future, Kemp said coldly. I didn't spend 15 years climbing the party ladder to throw it all away on a principled stand that accomplishes nothing. It would accomplish funding for schools, Martinez said. It would accomplish ending my career, Kemp replied. And then what? Some other Republican governor takes my place? And nothing changes anyway. At least if I maintain my position, I can influence policy from the inside. From the inside of what? A presidential cabinet while Georgia's kids suffer? Kemp's voice rose. Don't lecture me about suffering. I grew up in rural Georgia. I know what underfunded schools look like. But I also know that you can't help anyone if you don't have power, and power means making compromises. It was true that Kemp had grown up in rural Georgia, in a town called Millerville, where the high school was falling apart and the library closed 3 days a week. But what he didn't mention was that his father had been the town's bank president, and Kemp had attended private school in Atlanta from 7th grade on. His understanding of underfunded schools was theoretical at best. Martinez gathered her papers. Governor, I've worked for you for 6 years. I believed in your vision for Georgia. But right now, it seems like your vision is just yourself. After she left, Kemp stood alone in his office, the protesters' chants growing louder. He thought about the other governors who'd spoken out against the ESA. Governor Stein in North Carolina had not only opposed the bill, but had rallied other Republican governors to do the same. He'd been featured on magazine covers as a principled conservative who put children first. Kemp had been invited to join that group. The call had come from Stein himself, just days before the congressional vote. Brian, we need your voice on this. Georgia carries weight in education policy. If you stand with us, Others will follow, but Kemp had declined. He told Stein he was still reviewing the legislation, knowing full well that the window for meaningful opposition was closing. After the call, he'd immediately phoned the White House to assure them of his continued support. Now Stein was being mentioned as a potential presidential candidate in 2028, while Kemp was scrambling to maintain relevance in a party that valued loyalty over leadership. His phone rang. The caller ID showed White House. "Governor Kemp, this is Chief of Staff Patricia Wells. The president wanted me to touch base about the situation in Georgia." Kemp's pulse quickened. "Of course. What can I do for you?" "Well, we're hearing about some potential legislation down there that might undermine the ESA's objectives. The president is hoping you'll be able to guide your legislature toward solutions that align with federal policy." Kemp felt his stomach tighten. "Absolutely. I'm committed to supporting the president's education agenda." "Good to hear. You know, Brian, your loyalty hasn't gone unnoticed. When we're looking at key appointments, we remember who stood with us when it mattered." After the call ended, Kemp sat in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The promise of a federal appointment dangled before him like a carrot. But the protesters outside his window reminded him of the cost of his ambition. Morrison returned with a tablet. "Governor, you need to see this. It's gone viral." The video showed a teacher from Gwinnett County breaking down in tears as she explained how she'd been using her own credit card to buy basic supplies for her students. The tweet had been shared 50,000 times in 2 hours. "We need to respond to this," Morrison said. Kemp watched the video twice, then looked back at the protesters outside. "Draft a statement expressing my sympathy for the challenges teachers are facing. Emphasize that we're working within existing resources to maximize efficiency." "Governor, with respect, that's not going to cut it anymore. People want action, not sympathy." "Then they should have thought about that before they elected a Republican," Kemp snapped, immediately regretting his words. "I'm sorry, James. I didn't mean that." But he had meant it, at least partially. Kemp had always harbored a secret resentment toward the voters who demanded both lower taxes and better services. In his mind, they were naive about the realities of governance. Real leadership meant making the tough choices they couldn't understand. Over the next few hours, Kemp found himself fielding calls from party leaders, donors, and fellow governors. Each conversation reinforced his belief that speaking out now would be futile and career-ending. Senator Mitch Henderson from Tennessee called to warn him about the Stein faction trying to undermine party unity. "Brian, you're smart to stay above the fray. The president appreciates loyalty, and he rewards it." Billionaire donor Marcus Steinberg was more direct. "Governor, my foundation has been considering a significant investment in Georgia's charter school program. But we need to know we're working with someone who understands the long-term vision for education reform." The message was clear: fall in line or face the consequences. By evening, Kemp had made his decision. He would oppose the state legislature's funding bill, framing it as fiscal responsibility and alignment with federal policy. He would weather the political storm, confident that his loyalty would be rewarded with a cabinet position or other federal appointment. But first, he had to get through the CNN interview. Sitting in the makeshift studio in his office, Kemp faced the camera as anchor Anderson Cooper's voice came through his earpiece. "Governor Kemp, Georgia is facing a significant education funding crisis. Other Republican governors have raised taxes or reallocated funds to maintain school budgets. Why haven't you taken similar action?" Kemp had rehearsed this answer a dozen times. "Anderson, we have to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. The Federal Education Stabilization Act represents a thoughtful approach to education reform, and we're working within that framework to maximize efficiency and outcomes." But efficiency doesn't pay for textbooks or reduce class sizes. Teachers in your state are having to buy supplies with their own money. How do you justify that? Kemp felt sweat beading on his forehead. "I understand the challenges our educators face, and I have tremendous respect for their dedication. But we can't simply throw money at problems without addressing underlying structural issues." Governor Stein in North Carolina raised corporate taxes to maintain education funding. His approval rating is now at 68%. Are you concerned that Georgia families will see you as choosing political calculation over their children's education? The question hit Kemp like a physical blow. I think Governor Stein and I have different approaches to governance. I believe in working within the system to create sustainable long-term solutions, rather than making politically popular but fiscally irresponsible decisions. Even as he spoke, Kemp knew how hollow his words sounded. Stein hadn't just maintained funding, he'd actually increased it. His fiscally irresponsible decision had resulted in smaller class sizes, updated textbooks, and a teacher retention bonus program that was being studied by other states. After the interview, Kemp sat in his darkened office, the protesters long since gone home. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. Watching CNN, kids are asking why you look so sad. Are you okay? Kemp stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Just tired. Long day. But he wasn't tired. He was ashamed. Not enough to change course, but enough to recognize what he'd become. Somewhere along the way, the ambitious young legislator who genuinely wanted to improve Georgia had been replaced by a calculating politician who saw every crisis as an opportunity for advancement. The next morning brought news that would test Kemp's resolve even further. The teachers' union had called for a statewide strike, and early polling showed that 67% of Georgians supported raising taxes to fund education. More troubling for Kemp personally, his own approval rating had dropped to 34%, the lowest of his career. Martinez knocked and entered, holding a folder. "Governor, we need to talk about the Williams bill. It's going to pass with a veto-proof majority." Kemp felt his stomach drop. "You're certain?" Senator Thompson switched his vote this morning. He's facing a tough primary, and his opponent is hammering him on education funding. That gives Democrats the two-thirds majority they need. Kemp sank into his chair. A veto-proof majority meant he couldn't stop the bill even if he wanted to, but it also meant he could let it pass without signing it, maintaining plausible deniability with the White House. "There's something else," Martinez continued. "Channel 5 got hold of your phone records. They're reporting that you've had 17 calls with White House staff in the past month, including 3 with the president himself." Kemp's blood ran cold. "What's the angle?" "They're saying you're coordinating with Washington to block education funding. The headline is, 'Governor Kemp, Washington's man in Georgia.'" For the first time in months, Kemp felt truly cornered. His careful balancing act was collapsing, and he was being exposed as exactly what he'd become, a puppet of national politics, more concerned with his own advancement than the welfare of his constituents. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his mentor, former Governor Tom Bradley. "Brian, what the hell are you doing down there?" "Tom, I've been getting calls all morning. Party leaders, donors, even some folks from the White House. They're all asking the same question. Has Brian Kemp lost his mind?" Kemp felt a surge of hope. Maybe the party establishment was finally recognizing that his position was untenable. "What are they saying?" "They're saying you've mishandled this education thing so badly that you're becoming a liability. The president is reportedly disappointed in how you've managed the situation." The hope curdled into dread. "What does that mean?" "It means you've managed to piss off both sides, Brian. The voters hate you for not funding schools, and the party leadership thinks you're incompetent for letting it get this far. You were supposed to quietly implement the cuts and move on. Instead, you've turned it into a national story about Republican governors who don't care about children." Kemp felt the walls closing in. "What should I do?" "Honestly, I'm not sure there's a way out of this. You might want to start thinking about what you're going to do after politics, because your career in this party is probably over." After Bradley hung up, Kemp sat in stunned silence. Everything he'd sacrificed for, his principles, his constituents' trust, his own self-respect, had been for nothing. He'd destroyed himself politically while gaining nothing in return. Martinez knocked again. "Governor, there's a group of teachers here to see you." They're asking for just 5 minutes. Kemp wanted to refuse, but he knew he had to face them eventually. Send them in. The delegation was led by Amanda Chen, the fourth-grade teacher he'd watched from his window. Up close, she looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep. With her were 5 other teachers from across the state, each carrying photos of their students. Governor Kemp, Amanda began, we're not here to yell at you or make demands. We just want you to see who you're hurting. She laid out the photos on his desk. Smiling children, most of them minorities, all of them depending on public education for their future. This is Jamal. He's in my class. His mother works 2 jobs, and she's been asking me why there aren't enough books to go around. This is Maria. She's brilliant at math, but our calculator budget was cut, so she's learning arithmetic on paper while other kids have technology. Kemp stared at the photos, his throat tight. I understand your frustration, but... Do you? Interrupted another teacher, a middle-aged woman from rural Georgia. Because I don't think you do. I've been teaching for 22 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Kids sitting on the floor because we don't have enough desks. Textbooks so old they still show the Soviet Union on the maps. Governor, Amanda said quietly, we know you're in a difficult position, but these children don't care about politics. They just want to learn, and right now, we're failing them. Kemp looked at the photos again, then at the teachers' faces. These weren't political operatives or union agitators. They were dedicated professionals who'd spent their own money trying to compensate for his failures. I want to help, he said finally, but my hands are tied by federal policy. Other governors found a way, Amanda replied. Governor Stein, Governor Webb, even Governor Abbott in Texas. They all found ways to protect their students. Why can't you? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Kemp had no answer that didn't expose his cowardice, so he said nothing. After the teachers left, Kemp sat alone with their photos spread across his desk. Each child's face seemed to ask the same question. Why weren't they worth fighting for? His phone buzzed. A text from his political advisor. Damage control meeting at 3 p.m. Need to discuss your options. Kemp stared at the message, then at the photos, then back at the message. For the first time in months, he had a moment of clarity. His options had always been simple. Fight for what was right, or surrender to what was convenient. He'd chosen convenience at every turn, and it had led him to this moment of complete moral and political bankruptcy. The irony was bitter. In trying to preserve his political future, he'd destroyed it. In trying to avoid taking a stand, he'd taken the worst possible stand. In trying to serve 2 masters, he'd served neither. Kemp picked up one of the photos, a little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. According to the note on the back, her name was Sarah, and she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up. Her teacher had written, "Brilliant student, but our science program was cut. She's learning about the human body from a textbook older than she is." For a moment, Kemp imagined calling the White House and telling them exactly what he thought of their Education Stabilization Act. He imagined holding a press conference and announcing his support for the Williams bill. He imagined being a leader instead of a follower. But the moment passed. Kemp carefully gathered the photos and handed them to Martinez when she returned. "Put these in my personal file," he said, "and call Marcus. Tell him I'll take that meeting about damage control." As Martinez left with the photos, Kemp turned back to his window. The protesters were gone, but their message remained painted on the sidewalk in chalk. Our kids can't wait 2 years. By the time the rain washed those words away, Kemp knew it would be too late for thousands of Georgia children, and it would be too late for him. The man who'd once dreamed of national leadership had become a cautionary tale about the price of ambition without principle. In trying to be everything to everyone, Brian Kemp had become nothing to anyone, least of all himself. But even in this moment of recognition, Kemp couldn't bring himself to change course. The Williams bill would pass over his veto, schools would get their funding, and he would take credit for allowing the democratic process to work. He would serve out his term, fade into obscurity, and spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been if he'd found the courage to lead when leadership mattered most. Outside, the chalk message was already beginning to fade, but its truth would outlast Kemp's political career. Some things are too important to sacrifice for personal ambition, and some prices are too high to pay for power that means nothing when you're too weak to use it.